G'day, it's Coach Pete from Ascension, and this Whiteboard Wednesday is on the topic of rest periods. So rest periods are really important in our training, and we should consider how much we're going to rest between bouts of certain exercise sets. How do we work out what the correct rest period is for our individual session or exercise? Really comes back to what our overall goals and objectives are, which leads to the focus of a month, the week, and then individual sessions. We should understand what the objective and focus is of our sessions and then work together to make up our entire program. So once we start with our goal and focus, and that could be, for example, I want to increase my snatch 1RM by 5 kilograms, I want to deadlift 240 kilograms, or I want to run 5 kilometers in 20 minutes or less. We should consider what those goals are, and then that drives what our focus is. Once we know the goal and the focus, we can then work out what the requisite fitness qualities we need to train are. And once we know what the requisite fitness qualities, they work hand in hand to really drive what the intensity is. So specific intensities and different fitness qualities are in turn linked to different energy systems and muscle fiber types. If we want to train absolute strength, we're really looking for our type 2 muscle fibers working the alactic or the ATP PC system. If we're looking at trying to improve our marathon run time, for example, we know we're going to be limited to type 1 muscle fibers with the aerobic energy system. There are some other qualities in between, and they require due consideration. So the broad guidelines we have for the different energy systems, which are really linked to different muscle fiber types as well, are as follows. If we want to train the alactic energy system, we should have a work to rest ratio of 1 to 7. The reason for this, we're looking at maximum effort, and maximum effort utilizes our large muscle fibers, our type 2 muscle fiber types, which have a short, high intense burst of energy, but require a significant amount of time to reconstitute the ATP for a repeat bout. If we're looking to develop our absolute strength, our power, or our maximum speed over a short period of time, we need to be resting more than what we're working. If we're doing short sprint repeats as a rugby league player, we're not going to be having short rest periods, and we might only run for 5 to 10 seconds, but our rest is going to be at least 7 times as large as our work period. When we start looking at adding in additional resistance, that work to rest ratio increases further, and we might have a work to rest ratio potentially of 1:20 or even 1:30 in some circumstances. The key point with the alactic system is our rest is significantly larger than our work because we're exerting maximum effort or near maximum effort using our largest muscle fibers, which take a significant amount of time to recover the amount of ATP they need to repeat the effort. Moving on to the lactic or glycotic anaerobic system, we know that that is sub-maximal work. It's not quite maximum force output or maximum power output, but it's still relatively high intensity, and that's still going to be sub-maximum, so just under maximum effort. We can only really sustain this level of work or power output really for 30 to 60 seconds. And 30 seconds is towards the upper limit of the lactic system. 60 seconds of sustained work output is going to be a little bit lower in intensity. For our lactic or glycotic system, our work to rest ratio is going to be 1 period of work to at least 3 periods of rest or recovery. Say a 200 meter interval time is about 50 seconds. If we're going to do 50 seconds of anaerobic glycotic work, we're going to need at least 150 seconds of recovery in order to allow the type 2A and type 2X fibers to reconstitute the ATP they need to maintain another repeat bout of that same intensity. So we're going to go for 50 seconds of work to at least 150 or 2.5 minutes of rest. Moving on to the aerobic energy system, it again has variation depending on the actual work output. If we're doing sustained lower intensity aerobic work, we could effectively have no rest at all. And that is we are only working on a 1:0 work to rest ratio. That might be some long steady distance work. This is not going to be the upper end of our aerobic system, however. Looking at sustained, but on the upper aerobic power end of the spectrum, our work to rest ratio is going to be about 1:1. We might have 2 minutes of work to 2 minutes of rest. And that'll allow us to repeat the same level of intensity. Whilst it's aerobic, it's not maximum intensity, we may push the upper limit of what our aerobic power output is. Here, when we're determining what our rest periods are, it's really understanding what fitness quality we're trying to train and what energy system and muscle fibers are utilised that are required for that fitness quality. And when we look at resistance training in general, we typically don't use ratios for work to rest. They broadly comply with the work to rest ratios I mentioned above when it comes to alactic, lactic, and aerobic training. The top end of power and force development, the top end of any kind of resistance training, really is training absolute strength or power. It's going to be relatively lower reps, short bursts of high intensity work using type 2 muscle fibers in the ATP system. The general guidelines for the amount of rest required for those type of exercises generally going to be between 2 to 5 minutes, which is rather significant. For example, Mark or Jackson are doing snatches and clean and jerks above 90% of their 1RM. And if we're getting closer and closer to our 1 rep maximum for these significant power exercises, we're really going to be looking at 5 minutes of rest. Sometimes that rest interval might be even longer. And power has a slightly larger rest period than what strength work does. This is due to the recruitment not just of muscle fibers, but also the nervous system. So whilst the muscle fibers might actually recover at the same rate as a similar overall intensity to strength training, our nervous system has worked harder with power exercises. This is due to the fact that a large amount of muscular coordination, due to the fact that timing and coordination is needed to actually elicit the correct power output at high intensity. When we're doing strength training at sort of lower intensities, let's say around 70% or so, something that Dave and Kieran might do more frequently with their programs, their rest periods are going to be closer towards 2 minutes than 5 minutes. But as their absolute strength work gets closer and closer towards their 1RM, those rest periods in between sets are going to need to increase. And again, when they're going for work that's going to be probably 85%, even 90% and higher, the rest periods might be as high as 5 minutes, potentially even more sometimes. When we're looking at hypertrophy training, it's a little bit different. The work required for hypertrophy is conducted at lower intensities, typically looking at the 60 to 70% range for our 1 rep maximum and higher volume of repetitions. We're also trying to stimulate muscle growth. So the actual stress and load on our muscle fibers and the adaptation that causes hypertrophy is not caused by maximal work. The best way to elicit hypertrophy is actually to limit our rest periods. We're trying to elicit fatigue to stimulate growth of muscles, as opposed to trying to elicit strength and power adaptations. Because of this, our rest periods can be shorter. For any hypertrophy work, we're generally going to stick to the 30 seconds to 90 seconds or 1.5 minute range. That's a relatively good rule of thumb. So as that intensity drops, our rest periods are dropping also. We also see a transition as we're getting down to hypertrophy work from moving more towards type 2B fibers into the type 2X and even a little bit of type 2A muscle fibers, which don't have the same power output, but can regenerate faster because they're not as powerful. Moving down to strength endurance, our intensity is going to be significantly lower. It's still going to be resistance training, there's still going to be an external load. We're now sort of hitting that bridge between anaerobic and even aerobic training. So when we're doing strength endurance of higher rep work, let's say 20 reps and above, we're not really trying to elicit adaptations for hypertrophy, strength or power. Because of this, we want endurance or sustained lower intensity work, and our general trend for our rest periods is getting closer towards aerobic rest periods. Because of this, our rest periods need to be considerably shorter. For any working set, we're going to cap our rest periods pretty much at 30 seconds or less. We might hit 20 reps and then rest for 20 seconds or even 30 seconds before we do another high rep set. Now, this doesn't mean that every program should always have rest periods designated. Depending on the athlete or the client, they may not need to be told individual rest periods, and they can work at the right intensity without having it specified. In other circumstances, it can be useful to force specific rest periods for a number of outcomes. Take, for example, Mark, as he gets closer and closer to competition, will start bringing into his weightlifting program fixed rest periods. And this is due to specificity, and we're building him up to get used to conditions of a weightlifting meet where there's going to be a running clock for his attempts. Absolute worst case, he may only have 60 seconds between attempts, so he has to be prepared to work in 60-second blocks. Not going to be all of his sets, but a few sets might be on the minute work. Whilst we're not giving the ideal amount of recovery for power, not getting the ideal amount of recovery for power, which is 1 to 7 or above. We have to get more specific in our program as we get closer towards our competition. Other lifters such as Kieran and Dave, as mentioned earlier, also don't always need to be told how much to rest. They'll gauge based on how they're feeling on the day to know if they've recovered sufficiently to hit the next set.